final word, Patrice?
Yeah, I'm going to make everybody stand up if they can and do a chant with us.
Okay, let's do it.
So this is how we close out every meeting, every event, every action, every freeway we've shut down, every mall we've shut down. You'll hear this chant reverberated throughout this country, and you'll hear it in other countries now too. This is from our beloved Assata Shakur, who is on the #1 FBI most wanted list, and she's a powerful leader who we are inspired by. Many of us have Assata Taught Me sweaters. All right, let's have Mayor de Blasio hear this. It is our duty to fight for our freedom!
It is our duty to fight for our freedom!
I'm sorry, ladies. I know you could shout much louder. Okay? It is our duty to win!
It is our duty to win!
We must love and support one another!
We must love and support one another!
We have nothing to lose but our chains!
We have nothing to lose but our chains!
Ashe, Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Hello, this is Bobby Hesley coming to you live from 8,000 miles across the world from Thailand. I'm out on my morning walk, which I do every day. It's very hot out here, so you're gonna see some sweat, but that's okay, because I'm just a regular guy. I'm just a concerned citizen. I'm a concerned American. I'm a patriotic American who loves my country, who loves the United States of America, which is the greatest nation in the history of the world. And I'm watching on from 8,000 miles across the world, all the way over in Southeast Asia. And I'm watching as my country slowly burns from within. I'm seeing civil wars take place. I'm seeing riots. I'm seeing lootings. I'm seeing the destruction and the desecration and the vandalization of historic monuments that are sacred and dear to our country. And if you don't agree with certain monuments that shouldn't be up, there's a due process. There's a way to go about getting those removed. If you don't like their history, put them in museums, go through a legal process, but you don't just act like a vandal. You don't act like a criminal and just show up and destroy monuments. And I'm not talking about the monuments of Robert E. Lee or of Christopher Columbus. I'm actually talking about the monuments that are Catholic. In a video that I did a few days ago, and it's since gone viral, about why you can't support Black Lives Matter, one of the centerpieces of that video, one of the linchpins of that video that's making it go quite viral, is a claim in that video that I made that Black Lives Matter is an anti-Catholic organization. That's been getting a lot of headlines. That's been getting a lot of views and a lot of news lately about the claim I made that Black Lives Matter is anti-Catholic and why no Catholic has any business supporting Black Lives Matter. No Christian and no Catholic Christian has any business supporting Black Lives Matter. And if you're watching this video and you're not Catholic, I encourage you to stand with me, your brother in Christ, to stand against Black Lives Matter. Even if you're not a Christian, even if you're not a believer, even if you're atheist, if you love America, which I'm sure you do, I'm sure that's something that we have in common, is our love for the United States of America, I encourage you to stand with me. And I want you to know why I believe that Black Lives Matter is anti-Catholic. Well, number one of the most outspoken activists of Black Lives Matter is a gentleman by the name of Shaun King, S-H-A-U-N King, who I consider the male version of Rachel Dolezal. Okay? Rachel Dolezal is what she referred to as a transracial. She's a white woman who identified as black. Okay? Now, Shaun King has been outed as a white guy who walks around acting like he's black and acting like he's down for the struggle. And he has been calling for the destruction and the desecration of Catholic statues, of Catholic churches, of Catholic statues. He's been very anti-Catholic. So when people hear me say that Black Lives Matter is anti-Catholic, it's not a stretch at all. As a matter of fact, a few weeks ago in San Francisco, statues of Saint Junipero Serra were destroyed by Black Lives Matter activists. Now, what does Saint Junipero Serra possibly have to do with racism? What does he have to do with the death of George Floyd? As a matter of fact, Saint Junipero Serra was one of the first people in America to treat the American Indians with love and dignity. You probably wonder why a lot of the names in California, particularly Southern California, begin with the word San. For example, Los Angeles, that was named by a Catholic. San Francisco, San Diego, named after Saint Juan Diego. San Francisco, named after Saint Francis. Santa Barbara, named after Saint Barbara. Santa Fe Springs, Sacramento, just to name a few. These are all municipalities that are named after Catholic saints. Why is that? Because Saint Junipero Serra is a great saint to the Catholic Church, and he actually was the first to treat Indians, American Indians, with love and dignity. He evangelized them. He traveled hundreds of miles to baptize them and to catechize them in the Catholic faith, when everyone else was dehumanizing them. He showed up and he Christianized them. He treated them with dignity. He set up 21 different missions that took in the Native Americans. Sorry for the dogs, guys. Some of the sights and sounds of Thailand, right? But he set up missions that educated the Indians. He taught them skills. He taught them trades so that they can make money to feed their family, so that they can build communities of their own. And yet, and he even built the Camino Real. He had a big part in building the Camino Real. And if you want to know what the Camino Real is, look it up. And yet, this is the thanks that Saint Junipero Serra gets from anti-Catholic organizations like Black Lives Matter.
Activists toppling a statue of Junipero Serra outside Olvera Street in downtown LA. This is in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, according to the protesters. Eyewitness video from local news outlet LA Taco captured a group of tribal nations demonstrators hauling down the controversial statue with a rope. Now, Serra was a Spanish Catholic priest who founded the first 9 of 21 Spanish missions across California.
What an absolute disgrace that is, to see these sacred Catholic historical statues being beheaded, being toppled, and being vandalized and graffitied by the likes of Black Lives Matter and Antifa. And people wonder why I say that Black Lives Matter is an anti-Catholic organization. Do you need any more proof than what you just saw? It's not a stretch at all to label them for who they are, which are virulent anti-Catholics. But not only is Black Lives Matter an anti-Catholic organization, I'm going to actually tell you specifically why they are anti-Catholic. Because another thing that Black Lives Matter is they're also a communist organization. And because they're communist, that's the main reason why they're anti-Catholic. Do you want to know why? Because the Catholic Church has been the loudest, strongest voice against communism. As a matter of fact, all the way back in the early 1800s, in the early to mid 1800s, which was almost 100 years before the Bolshevik revolution that took over Russia in 1917 with Vladimir Lenin and was later, furthered by Stalin and the likes of him, all the way back in the year 1838. You had Catholic popes like Pope Gregory the 16th. You had Pope Pius IX that were condemning communism 100 years almost before Bolshevism, when communism was being promoted as a heresy. When the elite class thought leaders of the time, the thought leader elites, much like the liberal elites we see in the United States of America, They were trying to push communism as an ideology back then, an academic ideology in their universities and in their publications. This was before they had all the strength and they had all the manpower of the juggernaut movement that we saw communism grow over into the last 100 years with all these different governments and regimes and armies and financiers like George Soros. Before all that money and power and military might was behind communism, you have to understand that the roots of communism were ideological. And they were pushed in the academy. They began in academia. They began among the elites. In true to form, the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church was the first voice to meet communism head on and to condemn it harshly. And I'm going to read a few quotes from various popes throughout history that have condemned communism. But before I get to those quotes, we need to understand what communism is and why it's so evil and why it's so destructive and why this communism that's invading the United States of America, and I wouldn't even call it a soft invasion. It's not a soft invasion. It's a militaristic invasion of communism that is hitting the United States of America. We have armed Black Lives Matter militia that are carrying guns that literally, inadvertently killed an 8-year-old, Sequoia Turner, on July 4th weekend in a shootout between them and other militant groups. We have armed communist militants roaming the streets. We just saw CHOP, whatever you want to call it. For 3 weeks, they set up shop. It was a militarized communist pocket in Seattle, Washington that had multiple murders, all kinds of things that were going on within there, theft, rapes, assaults, murders that happened in the CHOP zones. That's straight up communism. It's not a soft invasion, guys. We are under attack. We are under communistic attack in the United States of America. But have no fear, because the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church is here. Because I'm going to read you some quotes about how to recognize and how to combat communism. And again, you don't have to be Catholic to agree with everything you're about to hear. But let me give you a quick generic, before I get into some of the more papal theological traditions, definitions of what communism is. And again, you don't have to be Catholic to agree with any of this. I would prefer that you were. I wish the whole world was Catholic. But don't be at odds with me on this. Even if you're Protestant or Jewish or Muslim or atheist, it doesn't matter what you are. I want you to just listen to the objective condemnations and definitions of what communism is from a Catholic perspective. But let me give you a quick dichotomy to help you understand and delineate what communism is. So the clearest example that we can think of is the 20th century. Now, the 20th century was by far the bloodiest century known to human history. We had more wars, more death, more atrocity, more chaos, more destruction in the 20th century than we've had in any other century combined. That's a fact. That's an indisputable fact. There have been mountains of bodies and rivers of blood that were piled up in the name of communism over the course of 100 years. So let me give you an example. Let's think about World War II. That's the most public example that we can think of. World War II was all about combating Nazism, the rise of the Third Reich in Germany under Hitler. Now, most people think that Hitler was the most bloody, cruel, evil tyrant of all time. And I'll agree with you that Hitler was a very bad man, to put it extremely mildly. Okay, when I die and go to heaven, I'm not expecting to see Adolf Hitler counted among the blessed, welcoming me into the heavenly court. Hitler was a terrible, evil man. But what if I were to tell you, and I'm going to give you some real history here that you're not taught in public schools, because public schools are controlled by communists, believe it or not. I'm not a conspiracy theory. Trust me on that. The fact is, Hitler was not the bloodiest tyrant of all time. Hitler doesn't come close to being the bloodiest, most murderous tyrant of all time, because Hitler was a Nazi. Now, what makes Nazism different from communism? I want to do a quick little contrast there. The difference between Nazi and communism is this, is that Nazism is focused outwards, okay? Nazism is directed outwards. What do I mean by that? The Nazis wanted to kill everybody. They wanted to kill a lot of people, and they did kill a lot of people. They killed 6 million Jews. And when you add up all the invasions and all the different wars, some say that the Nazi body count is somewhere between 12 to 15 million. That number can be debated. Let's not split hairs over it. Let's just say that the Nazis killed more than 10 million people. I'm sure we can agree on that. But you have to look at what distinguishes Nazism from communism is you have to look at who are the people that were killed. And here's the difference between Nazism and communism, is that the Nazis want to kill everybody else. They want to kill everybody else except themselves because they were a race, they were an Aryan, they were eugenicists. They believe in the superiority of the Aryan race, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan German race, which, by the way, Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, was also a eugenicist. I talked about that in my other video. She had an original project called the Negro Project where she wanted to exterminate the black population through abortion and through contraception. Because they believe, basically what a eugenicist is, eugenic is Greek, it's a Greek word, it's a combination of two words. The word EU in Greek means good. So anytime you see a word in Greek that begins with EU, it means good. And then you have the word genic, which means genes. So eugenics means good genes. So the goal and the mission of eugenicists is to promote their good genes throughout the world. But rather than breeding themselves into being the superior race, what they would rather do is kill off the inferior races. So if you want to have a planet populated full of blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryans from the Third Reich, from Mother Germany, the best way to go about that, the quickest way to go about that, is to just go ahead and kill off all the other inferior races. So you kill off the Jews, which is what they did. They killed 6 million Jews. You kill off the Gypsies. You kill off the Catholics. They killed lots of Catholics, which people don't know about. That's why Pope Pius XII was known by Jewish rabbis as the most righteous Gentile of the 20th century, because of everything that Pope Pius XII did to save the Jews and protect the Jews against Nazism and to fight against Nazism. He literally turned the Vatican into a sanctuary for Jews during certain times of World War II. They killed the disabled. The Nazis even killed homosexuals. Anybody who they believed were inferior on a genetic level, they hoarded them up into trains and buses and cages, and they put them in concentration camps where they baked them in ovens, they shot them at point-blank range, they tortured them, they experimented on them, and they did all these terrible things in the name of eugenics. So that's what Nazism is. Nazism is focused on killing everybody else, every other race, every other inferior breed, and I put that in quotes because that's how they view everybody who's not them as an inferior breed, so that your race can rise to the top, so that you can be the superior race. That's what Nazism is. It kills everybody else. How does that differ from communism? Well, communism is the reverse of that. Rather than killing everybody else, communism is focused inwards. Unlike Nazism, which is focused outwards on killing the other races. Communism is focused in on killing your own race. Communism is focused in on killing and exterminating your own people. And that's why communism has such a higher body count than Nazism. 10 times the body count that Nazism has. So why does Hitler always go down as the worst person who ever lived, the worst ruler who ever lived? Well, I want you to think about something. Who won the war? Who lost? Hitler didn't win the war. The Germans lost. You know, one of the spoils of war is that you get to rewrite history. That's one of the prizes that you get when you're on the winning side. When you're the victor, you actually get to rewrite history, right? That's one of the perks of winning the war. So who defeated the Nazis? Well, the United States of America. Once we got involved, once Pearl Harbor was bombed, it was on and cracking. We got involved. We invaded through, we stormed the beaches of Normandy, June 6, 1944, and it was pretty much a wrap after that, okay? Once they awoke the sleeping giant of the United States of America, it was a wrap, okay? The war was pretty much over. It was just a matter of time. But we also had some unlikely allies that also helped us defeat Nazism and Japanese imperialism. The Chinese and the Russians were actually on our side in a very strange way. Do you guys know who the bloodiest tyrant in history is? He blows Hitler out of the water. If you compare them just to sheer body count, he blows Hitler out of the water. It's Mao Zedong. Chairman Mao Zedong, and I'm an hour flight away from China right now, being in Thailand. I'm not too far from what I'm talking about. Mao Zedong is the bloodiest dictator in history. He has a body count of over 60 million people that he killed through a manufactured plague known as the Great Leap Forward. Look that up when you get a chance. Look up Chairman Mao, Great Leap Forward. It was a manufactured plague. It was a socialist experiment where he starved 45 million of his own people to death in the span of a very few short years. He killed another 15 people through various other tyrannical policies and ways that he ruled. So Mao, hands down, is the bloodiest dictator of all time. A close second to Mao is Joseph Stalin. He has a body count of 40 million people through Soviet communism. So you have the Chinese communists who killed 60 million of their own people. And then you have the Russian Soviet communists who killed 40 million of their own people. Now we can talk about Hitler. He's all the way down there with maybe 10 or 12 million. But again, the Russians were fighting against the Nazis, and the Chinese were fighting against the Imperial Japanese. So they were on the winning side. So because they were on the winning side of history, they were able to cover up their own atrocities and put all the blame and all the heat on Hitler. Because it actually makes you look more victorious. If you could say, we defeated the evil Third Reich. We defeated the evil Nazis. They were so big and bad. They killed these 6 million Jews. And us Chinese communists and us Soviet Russians, we came in and we crushed them. So the worse you can make your enemy that you defeated out to be, the more victorious you actually look. So again, one of the winning perks of war, winning war, one of the spoils of war is that you get to rewrite history. So that's why Hitler is always the fall guy. That's why we always hear Hitler being branded as the worst guy. So that fits in perfectly, in my opinion, with where we're headed if this Black Lives Matter nonsense continues to take root in the United States of America. Because Black Lives Matter is a distraction game. Just to use some football terminology for those of you that can help, to help you understand what I'm saying. Have you ever heard of the phrase running interference? When a quarterback wants to make a certain play, he needs other players to do what's called running interference, to where they distract the opposing side from what his plan is, so that he can carry out his plan of throwing the ball to this person that's isolated that he wants to throw it to, right? What Black Lives Matter does, because they're a communist organization, they are running interference. They're setting up fake decoys. They're setting up fake distractions, fake crises, fake race wars to get everybody's attention away from the real atrocities of black on black violence, which has taken almost 400,000 lives in just the last 35 years. They want to distract away from the atrocity of the ultimate form of black on black violence, which is abortion, which has claimed between 16 to 20 million black people that have died at the hands of other black people. That's what communism is. Communism is when you commit genocide against your own people. That's what differs it from Nazism. Again, the Nazis, they wanted to kill everybody else. The Jews, the gypsies, the gays, the disabled, the Catholics. They didn't want to kill their own because they saw themselves as superior. So they had to kill everybody else in order for them to become superior. Well, you know what? The communists, in order for them to become superior, they have to commit something that's different than genocide. It's called democide, D-E-M-O-cide, which means the government killing its own people. You had the Chinese Communist government killing its own people. Even recently, the way they covered up the coronavirus, COVID-19, massive cover-ups. Right? You had the Russians that killed 40 million of their own people. This is why Black Lives Matter is an anti-Catholic organization. Because they know that the loudest voice is the Catholic Church. And this is why it's so unfortunate to see certain leftist bishops and certain leftist clergy holding up their Black Lives Matter signs with their little virtue signaling smiles on their faces. They are a disgrace to the priesthood. And they don't speak for all Catholic clergy. They do not speak for the Catholic Church. I have some good holy priest friends who don't support Black Lives Matter. I'm not going to mention who they are because I'm not going to put their names out there. That's up to them if they want to put their names out there. But there are quite a few priests that are against Black Lives Matter. There are quite a few bishops that have already spoken out against Black Lives Matter because of their anti-family, anti-religion, anti-gender type ideology that they have. So let's go back in history for a little bit. I want to take you to some papal quotations real quick, and then I'll wrap up the video because I know I'm going over 20 minutes here. And then I'll wrap up, okay? So again, I said all the way back in the early 1800s, the early to mid 1800s, we already had popes that were meeting communism head on when it was at its ideological level, before it had grown into the big militaristic movement that it became later on. Unfortunately, they were unable to stop it, although they raised a lot of awareness about it. I give them credit for being the first to speak out against it. So I'm going to read from Pope Pius IX, okay? So here's a quick quote. Okay, this is a quote, and again, pardon the sweat, I'm out walking, it's really hot out here. This is a quote from Pope Pius IX. This was in 1846. It was from a papal encyclical called Qui Pluribus. And here's what he said. To this goal also tends the unspeakable doctrine of communism. Notice that he referred to communism as a doctrine, because at that point, that's all it was. It was an ideological heresy that the Catholic Church was the first and only to speak out against. To the unspeakable doctrine of communism, as it is called, a doctrine most opposed to the very natural law. For if this doctrine were accepted, the complete destruction of everyone's laws, government, property, and even of human society itself would follow. To this end, the most dark designs of men in the clothing of sheep, while are inwardly ravening wolves. Ravening wolves who humbly recommend themselves by means of a feigned and deceitful appearance of a purer piety, a stricter virtue and discipline. After taking their captives gently, they mildly blind them and then kill them in secret. Powerful words of Pope Pius IX against communism. And again, he refers to it as a doctrine, because at that point, that's all it was. It was a heresy that he was trying to crush, but it later grew. Once it caught on more, once the money got behind it, once different governments, once different military worlds got behind it, and then when the Bolsheviks came around, right around 1917, which Our Lady of Fatima warned against, she warned the 3 children against it. That's a whole other topic. Nobody heeded her warning when the Blessed Mother appeared in Fatima, which is a verified, documented miracle. The miracle of the sun. But the fact is, communism continued to grow. So let's move on to the next pope. And again, I'll get through these real quick because I know we're getting long on time here. The next pope who condemned it, who condemned communism by name, he called it out by name and condemned it, was Pope Leo XIII. So here's what Pope Leo XIII has to say about and against communism. This is from his papal encyclical from 1978 called Quod Apostolici Muneris. And here's what Pope Leo XIII said. You understand, venerable brethren, that we speak of the sect of men, that sect of men who, under various and almost barbarous names, are called socialists, communists, or nihilists, and who, spread all over the world, and bound together by the closest ties in a wicked confederacy, no longer seek the shelter of secret meetings, but openly and boldly marching forth in the light of day, strive to bring to a head what they have been long planning, the overthrow of all civil society whatsoever. Now, if you're in America right now, and again, I'm far away from home right now, I'm 8,000 miles across the world, but if you're in America right now, everything that Pope Leo XIII said, all the way back in 1878, almost 150 years ago, you are living what he said right now. Society is burning in America right now. Everything is so crazy in America. Everybody has these unjust lockdowns that they're going through, these quarantines during an election year, which is a pure political stunt. You got all these riots, you got all these demonstrations that are not peaceful, because you got black businesses and black communities being hollowed out in the name of standing up for black people. I'll never understand that. I'm going to show my support for black people by burning black businesses and black communities down to the ground. But again, that's what communism is all about. It's about race-on-race violence, race-on-race genocide, race-on-race destruction, whether it be destruction of private property, destruction of liberty, or even bodily destruction, the destruction of a life in the case of black-on-black abortion and black-on-black violence. So now I'm going to read the final quote of Pope Pius XI. So let me pull that up real quick. Now, this quote is from an encyclical of Pope Pius XI. It was written in 1937. It's called Divini Redemptoris. Divini Redemptoris. I will link to all of these in the comments below, in the video description below. And this is in 1937. Again, that's 100 years after Pope Pius IX, by the way, had spoken out against it. 100 years. Okay? 100 years ago. 100 years later, you still have the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church all the way from Rome, from the chair of Peter, condemning communism. And here's what Pope Pius XI said. He said, the communism of today, more emphatically than similar movements in the past, conceals itself in a false messianic idea. Did you get that? A false messianic idea or ideal. A pseudo-ideal of justice, of equality, and fraternity in labor impregnates all its doctrine and activity with a deceptive mysticism, which communicates a zealous and contagious enthusiasm to the multitudes entrapped by delusive promises. This is especially true in an age like ours, when unusual misery has resulted from the unequal distribution of goods in this world. He continues, this pseudo-ideal is even boastfully advanced as if it were responsible for a certain economic progress. Communism, moreover, strips man of his liberty, robs human responsibility of all its dignity, and removes all the moral restraints that check the eruptions of blind impulse. There is no recognition of any right of the individual in his relations to the collectivity. Now, notice when I read the other day of the What We Believe mission statement of Black Lives Matter, they talked about the collective, right? Whenever you hear that word collective, it's got communism written all over it. That's the serpent's tail. It stinks of communism whenever you hear that word. Just always be mindful of that word in this context. The individual in his relations to the collectivity. No natural right is accorded to human personality, which is a mere cogwheel in the communist system. In man's relations with other individuals besides, communists hold the principle of absolute equality, rejecting all hierarchy and divinely constituted authority, including the authority of parents. I want you to really listen closely to that, folks. Including the authority of parents. One of the linchpins, one of the centerpieces of communism is to break up the nuclear family, to break up the traditional family. And this was co-opted. There's another ism that communism hid under, known as feminism. And feminism is all about breaking up what they deem the patriarchy. They have destroyed the nuclear family, especially the nuclear black family. We've got that on lock more than any other race as far as the family unit being destroyed through family busting, family destroying welfare programs that penalize the mother for having a man in the house, that reward her for keeping the man out of the house. And all the way back in 1937, you had Pope Pius XI warning against the destructive nature of communism when it comes to the family, about how communism literally destroys and breaks up the family. And he actually goes into more detail in that, which I'll read here. Here's what he says. He says that communism is particularly characterized by the rejection of any link that binds woman to the family and the home, and her emancipation is proclaimed as a basic principle. That's got, again, communism co-opted feminism. Just like communism is trying to co-opt racism, it co-opted feminism in the same way. She is withdrawn from the family and the care of her children to be thrust instead into public life and collective production under the same conditions as man. Did you get that? In other words, rather than the woman having her rightful place in the home, raising the children where she's needed most, because she carried those babies for 9 months in her womb, they have a connection and a bond to her in their early years that they could never have with the father. It's a very unique maternal bond, right? There's different hormones and chemicals that are released that bond a woman to her babies. Oxytocin, vasopressin, all these different chemicals and hormones that are released during breastfeeding and childbirth. This is all science here. It's not only moral, it's not only, ethical, it's also scientific here. It's pure biology. And so here's what the Pope says. He continues in his explanation of how communism breaks up the family. And I'm going to link that to the Black Lives Matter website, and you will see firsthand how communist it is in this regard. He says, finally, the right of education is denied to parents, for it is conceived as the exclusive prerogative of the community, in whose name and by whose mandate alone parents may exercise this right. So all the way back in 1937, you had Pope Pius XI, the successor of St. Peter, the head of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, warning the entire world against the destructive nature of communism and about how it will break up the family if it's allowed to be spread. So I want you to keep everything in mind that you just heard Pope Pius XI say and warn against about how communism seeks to break up the family, and listen to that in the context of what blacklivesmatter.com says in their What They Believe section. Listen to this. It says, what we believe: we disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages. They put villages in quotes. That collectively care for one another. There's that word collectively again, that the Pope warned against. That Pope Pius IX warned against, Pope Leo XIII warned against, and that Pope Pius XI warned against. About that collectivism that breaks up the family. It invades the home and breaks up the family. It subordinates the individual to the community. That collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. You see that? You see how they exclude fathers from that? Finally, I don't have time for the sake of time, but I will post it in the description. Pope St. John Paul II also had strong words against communism. And Pope John Paul II played a huge role in bringing down Soviet communism in the 80s. He worked in conjunction with Margaret Thatcher, with Ronald Reagan, and without a single shot being fired, he brought down the Iron Curtain. You got to realize Pope St. John Paul II lived through the Holocaust. He had to go to seminary underground, like Pope Benedict XVI. They had to go to seminary in secret because of Nazism. So they lived through all of that, and they spoke out and wrote against it for their entire lives. Pope St. John Paul II brought down the Iron Curtain. Go read about that. There's all kinds of, facts and proof about that. So long story short, I know this is one of my longer educational videos. I'm out on my walk here, pardon the sweat. But I just want all of you, regardless of what your color, your creed, or your class is, okay? Regardless of color, creed, and class, I want you to stand with Bobby Hesley. Stand with your black Catholic buddy and fight against Black Lives Matter. When I say fight, I'm not talking about physical violence. Okay, I'm not calling for violence. I'm advocating the nonviolent approach of Dr. Martin Luther King. I want you to fight against it on an ideological level, the way the Catholic Church has been doing for the last 150 plus years. The church is under attack right now. The family is under attack right now. The United States of America is under attack right now. And in a very ironic way, the black race is under attack right now in a way that it's never been under attack before. Because like I said, the goal of communism is to run interference, to run this distraction game, to take your eyes off of the genocide that is occurring in the black community. The black on black violence and the black on black abortion genocide, you never hear anybody from Black Lives Matter talking about that because that's their game plan. They don't want people talking and thinking about that. They only want you to focus on the isolated incidents of police brutality like George Floyd, which make world headlines because of how rare they are when they occur. They want you to, in the words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 23, when he criticized the Pharisees, one of his critiques of them in Matthew chapter 23 is that he said that you choke on gnats and you swallow camels whole. You choke on gnats, but you swallow camels.
Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites all! For you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. You do not go in yourselves, nor do you let others enter. Blind guides! You strain at a gnat and swallow a camel.
In other words, think of how tiny a gnat is. A gnat is so tiny, yet the Pharisees would choke on a gnat. They would take these small, tiny, minuscule issues that are rare, and they would choke to death on those, but they would swallow a whole camel. Now, I'm not saying that the death of George Floyd or that police brutality and forms of racism that do exist in certain pockets of America, I'm not comparing those to a gnat, but they don't come close to the body count of all the other things that are killing black people. So the Black Lives Matter organization and the Black Lives Matter slogan, because you shouldn't support either, they choke on the gnat of rare police brutality, of white on black police brutality, but they swallow the entire camel whole of 20 million babies, black babies that have been aborted, and hundreds of thousands of black people that have been murdered at the hands of other blacks. And I love my black people. I hate to see my race destroy itself the way it's doing right now. But they have been given an assist in doing that by leftist policy since the 1960s that have contributed and expedited the breakdown of the black race. Because once you take the father out of the home, which was the goal of communism according to Pius XI, They wanted to break up the family. They wanted to take the father and the woman out of the home and sacrifice the children to the public collectivity, the village values, which Black Lives Matter talks about, which I just read from their website. A young black man is more likely to go to prison. He's more likely to commit crimes. He's more likely to be murdered. He's more likely to join gangs. He is more likely, exponentially more likely, to father children outside of wedlock and either abandon them or abort them, whichever A word you want to choose, if he doesn't grow up without a father. A man cannot learn how to be a man from a single mother. I'm sorry. A woman cannot teach a man how to be a man. Only a man can teach a man how to be a man. And there are studies that are done that talk about how destructive it is when men grow up without their fathers. It's terribly destructive. I grew up without a father. Now, thanks be to God, I had Jesus. I had my Catholic faith to sustain me and prevent me from becoming a statistic. But there's nothing more painful or dysfunctional than, or traumatic even, than growing up without a father. And that's what all the problems in the black community can be traced back to, is the wound and the sin and the scourge of black fatherlessness. If we can get the father back in the home, we would see abortion rates plummet. We would see black on black violence plummet. We would see the literacy rate go skyrocket through the roof. We'd see more blacks staying in school, getting education, starting businesses. A young black man who's full of testosterone but devoid of positive male influence is going to be much more suspect to most cops than other people because of all these demographics that he has working against him. I almost don't blame young black men. I mean, they do have to take responsibility for their actions. We all do. But think of how the odds are stacked against them. They have no masculine influence. They have nobody teaching them how to be a man. They got all this emasculization going on ever since childhood. You got all this toxic masculinity stuff being peddled about by Gillette and all these cultural woke warriors that are declaring war on masculinity. And you got all this stuff that's being influenced on all these young black men. That's the hand of cards they're dealt. So the only people that they have to turn to are hip hop artists and basketball players and all these phantom celebrities that are real people, but are phantoms in the sense that they don't know these people. They only know them vicariously through their images that are portrayed in culture and popular media. But they don't know these people. They're not personally mentored and guided and helped and supported by these people. They need their father to do that.
You know, incarceration rates in America has been a problem, especially as opposed to minorities. And Roman delves into the issues around the legal system. Do you think we've made any headway in the legal system?
I think it's more important to make headway in our own house. By the time the system comes into play, the damage is done. They're not locking up 7-year-olds.
Yeah.
You know, I was in Chicago a couple of 3-4 weeks ago, and we saw these little kids on bikes with masks on the side of their head, like 5 or 6 of them. And the driver said, yeah, they're little yummies. I said, who? He said, little yummies. Look up, Google Lil Yummy. Lil Yummy was an 11-year-old murderer.
Wow.
And you look at his picture, you'll see the headshot of him, and he's like this. And he got murdered at 11 by a 14-year-old.
Wow. Who's
doing life now, and a 16-year-old.
That makes no sense.
You blame the system? Where was his father? Yeah. It starts in the house. It starts in the home. And yeah, well, my father got locked up. Well, where was his father?
Yeah.
You know, like I did talk about my 3 closest friends, and they did, 15 to 25. One did 28, this and that. I was the only one of the 3 that had a father in my life, even though my parents were together. But I still had a father who was a gentle man and a good example, and they didn't. We can blame the system if we want, but they didn't lock any of us up at 7.
Yeah.
We were all doing enough to get locked up at 13. My parents sent me in another direction. They didn't have anybody to help them, and they kept doing what they was doing, and the system got them. So I don't, the system is rigged, but why, all the more reason not to help it.
So I know this video was about how Black Lives Matter is communist and anti-Catholic, but I want to end on that note because the end game of communism is the destruction of the nuclear family. And the reason why is because communism is a godless, secular ideology that seeks to put man in the place of God. All the attributes that are attributed to God, that he is omniscient, that he's all-knowing, that he's omnipresent, that he's present everywhere, and that he's all seeing, that he's all powerful. The state tries to co-opt those divine attributes and apply it to man. Rather than God being all powerful, communists want the government to be all powerful. They want the government to be in control of all the policies. They want the government to be all seeing rather than God being all seeing, who can see all things. They want the government to see all things. They don't want you to have any privacy. They want to spy on you. They don't want you to have any privacy rights. Rather than God being all-knowing, communism seeks to make man-made government all-knowing. They want to know every aspect of your lives. But nobody could ever run on that. No politician could ever just straight up run as a communist. So what communism has to do is they basically have to hijack certain movements. I call them communist equality movements, where they basically hijack these movements, okay? Because that's the only way they can pass. So what they do is they tug on the heartstrings of the masses. What does everybody who wants to live in a just and equitable society want? They want equality. Equality is a virtue that's universally appealing to everybody in society. So what the communists do is, rather than running as who they really are, because they wouldn't get any votes or any power that way if they told everybody who they really are, they fool and they trick people into voting for them by hiding behind equality. Right? That's what they did with feminists. They have to create an us versus them mentality. Right? You have the bourgeoisie versus the proletariats. That's what the Marxists were all about. The rich versus the poor. The laborers versus the capitalists. The men versus the women. The black versus the white. The gay versus the straight. It's all these us versus them equality movements that communism hijacks. And that's what we see going on right now. And that's the only way that they could gain power. You're never going to see a communist straight up say who they are. They're not going to say, I don't want you to have any rights. I don't want you to have any property rights. I don't want you to have religious freedom. I don't want you to have the right to marry. I don't want you to have the right to vote. I want to take away your gun rights. Vote for me in November. I approve this message. Nobody would vote for them. So what they have to do is come across as these equality warriors, these woke equality warriors. And again, whether they use race, whether they use gender, whether they use sexual orientation, whether they use class of rich versus poor, it doesn't matter. All these equality movements are communist in nature. And we have to see it for what it is. Listen to what the Catholic Church says about communism and heed that warning. That warning has gone unheeded for the last 150 years. They didn't heed the popes. They didn't heed Our Lady of Fatima when she warned the world against the errors of Russia that would spread everywhere. And look at what happened. So I'm begging you, again, whether you're Catholic or not, I'm begging you to stand with your black Catholic brother, Bobby Hesley, to stand up against communism. Okay? God bless. Stay tuned for more videos, and I will see you soon. I love you. Bye-bye.